Well, I have had 4 incidences of gun violence affect my life personally. The first and probably the most severe was that when my little brother was 7 years old, he was shot in the head by a neighbor boy, a teenager, that lived down the street who just snapped one day, and my brother happened to be out riding his bike and he called him into the house and he shot him point blank in the head. I was 14 years old and we had a single mom, so my mother screamed for me to help, and I held my brother on the way to the hospital as he was losing consciousness. He was in the 1st grade, he was missing his 2 front teeth, and he survived, and it's still hard for me to talk about it all these years later because it completely shattered our lives and it shattered his life. And I always wonder what his life might have been like had he not been carrying not only the trauma but the brain damage and the piece of the bullet that still is in his brain. We will never know why he shot my brother. He was a kid who had been bullied a lot. Later came out he had been a victim of child abuse from his own parents. I mean, who knows where the cycle of violence starts, but the problem was that he was able to easily access his father's loaded gun. And if that hadn't been accessible to him, our lives wouldn't have been destroyed. Maybe it would have ended in a fist fight or a picking on somebody or something else. But instead it ended with a bullet in my 7-year-old brother's head. So one of the other things that happened was that same summer, I witnessed my neighbor put a gun to his head and kill himself right in front of my house. That was really traumatic. So I've seen a child shooting and I've seen a suicide. And then my best girlfriend, who, when my brother was shot, she was with me at the hospital, just by my side. 20 years later, her ex would shoot her 5 times, point blank, with hollow point bullets, twice in the chest, 3 times in the stomach, in front of her 2 and 4-year-old daughters. She survived. But people hear in the news if somebody survives a shooting and they think it's a happy ending, but it's never a happy ending when gun violence is involved. Her life has been trials and testifying and fear of him getting out of prison and not knowing how to protect herself or to raise her girls in a world where domestic violence and guns exist. And then the next thing that happened was my husband's childhood best friend that he grew up with. They used to play cops. They used to play like the cops they'd see on TV, Hawaii 5-0 and all of this, and they'd ride around on their bikes. And my husband's friend, Butch, he grew up to be a police officer, and he was a sergeant in Santa Cruz. And 2 years ago, he was gunned down by a maniac with an AR-15, and he and his partner were both instantly killed in the line of duty. And, I didn't grow up in a Third World War-torn country. I grew up in the San Fernando Valley in Southern California, and I've had all these instances with gun violence in my own life. So, I decided that if I didn't do something about it, it was going to be really hard for me to get out of bed every day.
Mm-hmm. How do you feel about guns now?
The way I feel, well, first of all, I read on a daily basis every story of gun violence in this country. That's part of my job. I'm very educated about it. I go to all the conferences. I know, what's been studied. I know that the more guns that we have in this country, the more gun violence there's been. I don't, we have a lot of relatives that come from the farmlands in the Midwest, both my husband and and they're hunting cultures, and I don't have any problem with that. I don't even have any problem with, my girlfriend who was shot, she's talked about wanting to get a gun. I get it, I understand why she feels she needs to protect herself and her daughters. However, I'm very concerned that if she doesn't have the proper training, extensive proper training, that gun could be used against her, because statistically it more often is used against the woman who buys a gun. I don't think it's something to be taken lightly. If you feel you have to have a gun for self-protection, if you really are trained and know what you're doing, and you know how to safely store your weapons so that it can't be stolen and used against you, or that a child can't get it, or that a teenager who might be having a bad day couldn't use it to commit suicide, I don't have a problem with you having that. But what I do have a problem with are the gun laws in this country that are so loose that pretty much anyone, including a terrorist, a convicted domestic violence abuser, can get a gun. I have big problems with that, and that's what I'd like to see. That's what I'd like to see changed.